It all began with a locked bathroom door. Emily never locked it. Never. But that night, as I passed by on my way to the kitchen for a drink, I heard the faint click of the lock turning. That small noise immediately triggered something deep within me, an unsettling feeling I couldn't ignore. I paused and listened closely. The sound of water running in the shower filled the air, but there was something else, whispers. They weren't clear enough to understand, but they were distinct enough to make me realize she wasn't alone. I should have kept walking, ignored it altogether, but my body wouldn't move. I found myself frozen, heart racing, straining to hear more. The whispers stopped suddenly, and moments later, I heard the splashing of water. There was a hurried rustling, panic in the air. Emily never rushed in the shower. She always took her time, savoring every moment. Something was wrong. The thought hit me instantly. She wasn't alone. No, that couldn't be right. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Maybe she was talking on the phone, but who talks on the phone in the shower? And why lock the door? I silently backed away and went to the bedroom. My hands were cold, but my face burned with heat. My throat felt dry, and my mind screamed at me to think, to stop, to reason. But my body had already made its move, and I found myself reaching for her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up, and my heart stopped. A single text message. Just one, but enough to shatter everything I thought I knew about my wife. Last night was unforgettable. I can still feel you on me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at the message, gasping for air, my mind spinning. The ringing in my ears was deafening, and my fingers tightened so hard around the phone that they began to ache. It was from someone named Nick, a name I didn't recognize. I couldn't help myself. I scrolled up, both afraid and desperate to know more. The conversation was brief, just a handful of messages, but the tone was all too familiar. Casual, comfortable, too familiar. This wasn't something new. Emily, you're insane. It was just one night. Don't get clingy. Nick, one night? You think I believe that? Emily, you should. Nick, I should also believe you didn't moan my name like a desperate little. I couldn't go on reading. My pulse thundered in my ears, and a sick realization crept over me. My wife had cheated, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. The bathroom door opened, and Emily stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping water onto the carpet. When she saw me standing there with her phone in my hand, she froze. For a split second, I saw something flash across her face, not guilt, but annoyance, as if I were the one causing trouble. What are you doing with my phone? She snapped. I met her gaze. For the first time since we'd been together, I truly saw her. Not through the lens of excuses, not with rose-colored glasses, just a woman who had just been caught, standing there in a towel, glaring at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. I took a slow step forward and held up the phone screen, letting her read her own words. I watched her closely. She didn't flinch, didn't stammer. She simply stared at it. Then, in the coldest, most detached voice I'd ever heard, she said, "You shouldn't go through my stuff." A sharp, humorless laugh escaped my lips. That's all you have to say. Emily exhaled deeply, rolling her eyes. Jesus, Matt. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. My whole body went stiff. A mistake. She shrugged as if we were discussing something trivial, like burning dinner. It was just a one-time thing. I could barely comprehend what I was hearing. You cheated on me, and all you have to say is it meant nothing? Well, yeah, she said, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. I was drunk. It was stupid. But it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. My breath caught in my chest. The weight of her words, her lack of remorse, pressed down on me, suffocating me. She stood there, waiting for me to let it go, as if this was just a small bump in the road that we could laugh off. But nothing would ever be the same again. I forced my voice to stay steady. Who is he? Emily rolled her eyes again, as though I were being overly dramatic. It doesn't matter. Who is he? I repeated, my voice growing firmer. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It's nobody, Matt. Just a guy from work. Look, I'll block him, okay? It's done. I don't even care about him. A guy from work? My vision blurred, my mind racing. She was still lying, still minimizing, still treating me like a fool. I took another step closer to her. This time, she didn't move. She didn't flinch or back away. Instead, she crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. You're overreacting, she said. I came home to you, didn't I? Something inside me snapped. I gave her a slow, deliberate smile that made her take a step back. You're right, I said quietly. She blinked, confused. What? I nodded, still smiling. You're right. It wasn't something significant. There was a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Matt. I turned around, walked past her, and grabbed my keys from the dresser. My heart was pounding in my chest, so hard it felt like it might explode, but my hands remained calm. Emily frowned. Where are you going? I didn't respond. I simply walked out, got into my car, and drove. Hours later, when I returned, Emily walked into an empty house. Before I had even reached the highway, Emily had called me 5 times. Each time, I let the phone ring without answering. With every unanswered call, the silence became more suffocating. The woman I had built my life around, the one I had trusted more than anyone else, had stood in front of me wrapped in a towel, brushing off her affair as if it were nothing. And I had smiled at her, not because I forgave her, not because I accepted what she had done, but because I had already made my decision. She wanted to act like it didn't matter, as if she could just ignore it and move on. Fine, I thought. I would treat it the same way. By the time I reached the first intersection, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Emily. Come home. Stop being dramatic. Dramatic? I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles began to ache. This wasn't an apology. There was no remorse, no regret, no pleading. Just annoyance. Emily wasn't scared of losing me. She wasn't even worried. In her mind, I would return eventually. I would bottle up my feelings, suppress them, and everything would go back to normal. That was the assumption she had made. I took a slow, steady breath and made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a fight. I was going to make her feel what I felt. I turned the car around, not toward home, but toward a 24-hour storage unit on the other side of town. By the time I arrived, I already had a plan in place. It took me 2 hours to clear out everything I had ever brought into that house. My clothes, my electronics, my tools, every piece of furniture that was mine before I had met her. The TV, the couch, the bed frame. I left the mattress behind because it was hers, and now, after everything, I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't just pack up my things. I took everything that had been a part of me out of that house. The coffee mug I used every morning, the pictures of us from years ago before she changed, the little things she would eventually notice and realize too late that I was gone. By the time I was done, it was nearly dawn. I left her a note, a brief message, just a few words, scribbled on the kitchen counter with a marker I found in a drawer. Not a big deal, right? And then, I walked out. An hour later, as the sun began to rise, my phone rang again. I didn't answer it. Then another text appeared. Emily, what the hell, Matt? I smiled. Now it was suddenly a big deal. The first call I ignored. The second, I let ring long enough to hear the edge of panic in Emily's voice before I sent it to voicemail. The third call came with a text. Where is all your stuff? No apologies, no request for me to come back, no desire to talk, just confusion and shock. As if it never crossed her mind that I would actually leave. As if she thought I would do what I always did, take a deep breath, swallow my pride, and let her get away with it. I let her stew in that silence for a while, parked outside a rundown diner that smelled of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. I stared at my phone on the table. I had no appetite, but I ordered something anyway. I watched the steam rise from my mug and the condensation form on the glass of orange juice. Everything felt sharper, the hum of the overhead lights, the hushed conversation of the couple in the booth behind me, the way my fingers twitched against the table, almost like they needed something to grip. This was real. This was happening. And I had no idea what would happen next. Then my phone buzzed again. Emily, where are you? Emily, why are you acting like this? Emily, call me now. I exhaled slowly, running my thumb over the screen, hovering over the call button. Then, one last text came in. Emily, stop being a child and come home. A child. Something cold spread through me. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Then, with careful and deliberate movements, I typed my response. Home? You mean your house? The 3 little dots appeared immediately, then stopped. Then they started again, stopped again. She didn't know how to respond to that. And that told me everything I needed to know. My phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another text arrived. Emily, oh my God. Are you actually leaving me over this? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Over this? Like she had accidentally broken my favorite coffee mug or forgotten to pick something up at the store. I left my money on the table, grabbed my keys, and walked out. The next call, I answered, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I wanted her to hear mine. Hello. She snapped the second the call connected. I let the silence stretch between us, allowing her to feel the weight of it. After a moment, I finally broke the stillness with my voice. Why are you calling me, Emily? Her reaction was immediate. What? Are you? What do you mean? She stammered. You left. Matt. I woke up, and all your stuff was gone. You're right, I replied, keeping my tone steady. I did. There was a pause, and then she asked, Are you serious right now? I walked toward my car, leaning against it, watching the quiet flow of early morning traffic. You said it was no big deal, I said. Emily exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. Oh my God, Matt. It wasn't. It was just one night. One stupid mistake. So why does it matter that I'm gone? I shot back, my voice tinged with disbelief. She sputtered, unable to grasp the inconsistency in her words. You're my husband, she said, her voice faltering. I let out a humorless laugh, one that was sharp and bitter. You don't get to call me that. She gasped, and I could hear her breath catch. Matt, no, I interrupted, firm. You made your choice. You just didn't think I would make mine. There was a pause before she whispered, You're really leaving me? It wasn't a question, just the painful realization settling in. It hit me then, she hadn't truly believed I would walk away until that exact moment. She had thought I was just throwing a tantrum, that I would cool off and eventually return, as I always did. But now she understood the truth. I was done. I let that truth sink in, and then, quietly, I said, Goodbye, Emily, before hanging up. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, there was no one waiting for me, no one expecting my return, no obligations to fulfill. I should have felt liberated, free, even empowered. Instead, I felt empty. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel as if it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My phone sat on the passenger seat, its screen dark and lifeless. No calls. No messages. I knew Emily wouldn't let it go. She would try again. But for now, all I could do was sit in the quiet and let it wash over me. She had cheated. She had lied. And when I discovered it, she barely reacted. The part that stayed with me was her lack of remorse. The look on her face when I confronted her with the messages, no panic, just irritation, as though I was the inconvenience, not the husband who had been betrayed. I needed to move. I needed to escape the stillness. Starting the car, I pulled onto the road, unsure of where I was headed, just knowing that staying still wasn't an option. About 15 minutes later, my phone lit up. Emily's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring, then another call came through. Then another. And finally, a text. I'm sorry, okay? Can we just talk? I ignored it. Another text came. This is insane. You're throwing everything away over one mistake. That did it. I pulled into a parking lot, shifted the car into park, and stared at her message until my vision began to blur. Was it rage? Exhaustion? Or something deeper? My hands were shaking. She still didn't understand. This wasn't about one mistake. It was about who she had become when I found out, the lies, the minimizing, the complete lack of respect. I wanted to reply, to tell her everything I was feeling, but just then, another message arrived. You're being ridiculous. Just come home and let's talk. That was it. Every ounce of anger drained from me. In that moment, I saw it clearly. She wasn't trying to fix this. She wasn't seeking to make things right. She just wanted to win. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about our marriage. It was about control. Emily had never thought there would be consequences for her actions. She had expected me to be the same man I had always been, the man who forgave, the man who let things slide. But that man was gone, and I was about to prove it. Taking a slow, steadying breath, I typed my response. Matt, I'll be home in an hour. The reply came quickly. Finally, I'll be waiting. I put the car back in drive, heading home. But I wasn't coming back to make up. I was coming back to end this. When I pulled into the driveway, Emily was already waiting on the front porch. She stood there, arms crossed, foot tapping, as if rehearsing the performance she had been preparing for. Her expression shifted between irritation and forced concern, but there was no genuine panic. No fear. She still believed she held the upper hand. I stepped out of the car slowly, deliberately, my gaze locked on her as I approached. She was wearing leggings and one of my old sweatshirts, the kind she used to steal because she liked how it smelled like me. Now, it just seemed like a hollow prop, a costume trying to remind me of what we once were. But it wasn't working. Done with your tantrum? She asked as soon as I was within earshot. I almost laughed. Almost. Without responding, I walked past her, heading straight for the front door. Move, I said, my voice firm. Emily frowned, her brows knitting together. Matt, move. Something in my tone made her hesitate. She stepped aside, allowing me to pass, but I could feel her eyes on me as I entered her house. Not my house. Not anymore. Everything inside was just as I had left it, empty. Stripped down to the bare bones of what it used to be. As I walked through the door, I realized this wasn't my home anymore. It had been reduced to nothing more than a shell of what it once was, a mere reflection of what we had shared. The walls felt empty without the photos, and the living room seemed smaller without my furniture. It was as though the warmth had left with me when I walked out, and the air around me felt colder. Emily followed me inside, shutting the door quietly behind her. "Are you done being dramatic?" she asked. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, grabbed the marker I had left on the counter, and wiped away the note with the sleeve of my jacket. Behind me, I heard Emily sigh. "Seriously? You're just going to act like a child now." I turned around slowly and leaned against the counter, meeting her gaze. "Tell me something, Emily," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Was it worth it?" She blinked in confusion. "What? Was it worth it?" I repeated, more firmly. "Losing me? Our marriage? Everything we built? Was that one night worth it?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes as if my question was absurd. "Oh my God, Matt. Stop. It was one night. One mistake. I told you I'm sorry. What else do you want from me?" I shook my head slowly. "You don't know what I want?" "Yes," she snapped. "I don't. Because none of this makes sense. You're acting like I killed someone. I slept with another guy once, and suddenly you're treating our entire marriage like a lie." I tilted my head and studied her. "Tell me the truth, Emily." She frowned. "I am telling the truth." "No," I said, my voice still calm. "You're not. Because if you were, you wouldn't be this angry. You wouldn't be this defensive." Her eyes shifted uncomfortably, and I saw it, a brief flicker of fear. For the first time, I realized that maybe I wasn't as naive as she thought I was. I gave her a slow, knowing smile. "It wasn't just one night, was it?" Her breath hitched. "Matt, how long?" I asked, my voice even. She shook her head, trying to avoid the question. "It doesn't matter." "How long, Emily?" I insisted. She exhaled sharply, looking away from me. "It was a couple of times, okay?" I let the silence stretch, letting her feel the weight of it. Then I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "How many times?" She swallowed hard, but didn't answer right away. "Matt, how many times?" I asked again, more firmly now. She finally looked at me, and for the first time since everything started, I saw real guilt in her eyes. "5," she whispered. I let out a slow breath, not because I was shocked, but because hearing the truth from her made it feel more real than anything else. 5 times. She had kissed me, slept beside me, and told me she loved me, all while secretly betraying me. And she had called it a mistake. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Her shoulders dropped slightly, as though some weight had been lifted. "Matt, I pulled my wedding ring from my finger and placed it on the counter. Her breath caught in her throat. "Wait. This is done, Emily," I said quietly. She stared at the ring, like it was some kind of explosive device. It seemed like she thought that if she said the right thing, she could still stop it. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control. "You don't mean that," she whispered. I gave her one last look, memorizing the face of the woman I had once loved. "I do." And then I walked out, leaving her standing there in the silence of the house. The door barely clicked shut behind me before Emily's voice broke the stillness. "Matt," she screamed, her voice cracking the quiet morning air. I didn't stop. My footsteps were quick and steady as I moved away. "Matt, stop. You're not doing this. You're not just..." I turned slowly, and she stumbled to a halt at the bottom of the porch steps. Her breathing was rapid, panic creeping into her expression. "You're not leaving," she said, her voice trembling. "We're going to talk about this like adults." I let out a short laugh. "Talk like adults? Like how you talk to Nick?" Her face twisted in frustration. "That's not fair." "Fair," I repeated, stepping closer. "You want to talk about fair?" She swallowed and looked away. "I don't." I cut her off, my voice cold and sharp. "No, you don't want to talk. You want me to forget." Emily flinched, knowing I was right. We stood there for a long moment, staring at each other. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Then, she crossed her arms, clenching her jaw. "I don't get why you're doing this." A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. You still don't get it, do you? She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. I shook my head. You thought I'd be mad. Thought I'd yell. Maybe break something. Leave for a few hours to cool off and then come back, and we'd go through the motions. You'd cry, swear it was a mistake, and I'd take you back because that's what I've always done, right? Her lips parted, but no words came out. You never believed I'd actually walk away, I said, watching her squirm. You aren't upset about what you did. You're upset because your plan backfired, I said. Her face immediately turned hard, and she shot me a glare. You're a jerk, she spat. I smiled to myself. There it was. The mask was finally gone. The sweet, apologetic act she had been putting on faded away. What stood before me was the real Emily. The one who never thought she'd face any consequences. The one who saw me as nothing more than something she could control. For the first time in years, I saw the realization on her face that she had lost. She tried once more, shifting her posture, her voice trembling as she spoke. Matt, please. We can fix this. I stared at her for a long moment, letting her desperation settle in. I wanted her to understand there was nothing left to salvage. Then, in the calmest voice I could muster, I simply said, No, Emily. You'll have to live with it. Without another word, I opened the car door and slid in. This time, she didn't follow. I had no idea how long she stood there, frozen in place, watching me drive away. I imagined she was hoping I would change my mind. But as I left the driveway, the last image I saw in my rearview mirror was of Emily, motionless and speechless, for the first time in her life, completely powerless. I didn't head anywhere in particular. I just needed to leave. I drove away from that house, from her voice, and from the last 7 years of my life that had just gone up in flames. I should have felt something, relief, maybe, or victory, or even satisfaction. But all I felt was emptiness. The city passed by in a blur, streetlights, cars, people living their lives, completely unaware that mine had just shattered. It felt surreal, like watching a movie where the protagonist loses everything. But this wasn't fiction. This was my reality. My phone, lying face down on the passenger seat, vibrated constantly, buzzing with every few minutes. Emily. I ignored every single call, every text, every attempt she made to pull me back into her world. I didn't know how long I drove before I found myself pulling into some random parking lot. The engine stopped, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. The weight of everything, the loss, the uncertainty, came crashing down on me all at once. I had nothing. No home, no wife, no plan. The only things I had left were a storage unit full of my belongings and a phone that refused to stop vibrating. Another call. Another text. This time, it read, Emily, you're being a coward. Running away like this instead of facing what happened. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Coward? That accusation coming from her? I stared at the message, feeling something dark stir inside me. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't regretting. No, she was simply angry because she couldn't control me anymore. And even now, she still thought she could win. Then came another message. You're going to regret this. You'll wake up and realize you threw away a marriage over one stupid mistake. One mistake? She had admitted to 5 betrayals, but she still tried to act as if this was some minor misstep in our perfect love story. I ran a hand over my face and exhaled slowly, my pulse steady, my breathing even. And just as I was about to set my phone down, another message came in. Emily, I bet Nick treated me better than you ever did. I froze. The air in the car shifted. All this time, she had been trying to reel me back in, playing the victim, but now, knowing it wasn't working, she was going for the jugular. At least he made me feel wanted. When was the last time you did that? Something inside me broke. Not from anger. Not from pain. But from clarity. I typed my response without hesitation, my fingers steady on the keys. Matt, you're right. I should have made you feel wanted. If I had, maybe you wouldn't have had to throw yourself at some desperate loser from your office. The message bubble appeared instantly, then paused. It appeared again. Emily, you don't get to talk to me like that, she typed back. I smiled to myself. Matt, what are you going to do? Emily, cheat on me? Silence. Then came the final message. Emily, you. Matt, already did, I replied. But she didn't respond. Nothing. I could almost picture her, staring at her phone in disbelief, seething. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt good. She had spent months making a fool of me, lying, laughing behind my back. Now, she was tasting what it felt like to be powerless. To lose. I set my phone down and leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The following morning, I woke up to chaos. I had crashed at a cheap motel just outside the city, a rundown place that smelled like cigarettes and bad decisions. The bed was stiff, the walls thin, but I didn't care. I just needed to stop somewhere far from Emily. When I checked my phone, it was clear she had spent the entire night trying to pull me back into her world. 27 missed calls. 53 texts. I sighed as I scrolled through the madness. At first, she stuck to the same script. Emily, come home. Let's talk. Emily, you're ruining everything over nothing. Emily, you're acting crazy. Just pick up the phone. But then, when I didn't respond, her tone shifted. Emily, you want to act like you're the victim? After everything I put up with from you? Emily, you're not some perfect husband, Matt. Maybe if you'd paid more attention, I wouldn't have needed someone else. Emily, do you really think you're so virtuous? Do you believe that walking away makes you the good one here? Well, let me give you a reality check. It just makes you seem weak. As she realized her tactics weren't working, her messages grew increasingly frantic. Emily, I didn't mean any of that, came the first one. Please, Matt. I need to see you. I messed up. I know I did. Just give me one chance to make it right. Another message followed. Emily, I love you. Please don't do this. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my temples, as I anticipated it all. The anger, the insults, and then the sudden wave of regret when she figured out I was done playing her game. I had seen through her, and she hated that. But as I was about to block her number for good, I saw her last message. Emily, I told my parents you left me. They're furious. A slow smirk spread across my face as I stared at the screen. Of course, she went to them. Emily always knew how to play the victim, and when she couldn't manipulate me anymore, she turned to someone else. Her parents had always liked me, especially her father. He was the man who had shaken my hand on our wedding day and said, "Take care of my little girl." What would he think if he knew what his daughter had done? I quickly typed out a response. Matt, did you tell them why? A minute passed. Then another. Finally, another message appeared. Emily, don't you dare. I chuckled. There it was. She wasn't heartbroken, nor was she sorry. She was scared that the truth was about to come out. Her perfect little world, the one where she played the innocent wife and I was the unreasonable husband, was about to crumble. I stretched, grabbed my jacket, and stood up. If Emily wanted to drag her parents into this, so be it. Let's see how she liked it when the full story came out. Emily had always been a master at twisting the truth. She could cry on cue, turn the smallest inconvenience into a tragedy, and somehow always manage to be the victim in every scenario. But now, she had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated me. By the time I pulled into her parents' driveway, my phone was buzzing with new messages and missed calls. Emily had figured out what I was doing. Matt, don't, she pleaded in one text. I swear, don't do this. Then another. I will never forgive you if you tell them. The next one. You're being cruel. We can fix this. I turned off my phone and got out of the car. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to do one thing. Expose the truth. Before I even knocked, the front door swung open. Emily's mother, Susan, stood there, her eyes red from crying, her face tight with barely controlled anger. She had clearly been upset, likely all morning. As soon as she saw me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Matt, she said in a cold tone, come inside. I nodded, stepping past her into the house. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. Emily's father, Richard, stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed and his face unreadable. I had always respected Richard. He was quiet but firm, the kind of man who valued responsibility and accountability, which is why I knew exactly what Emily had told them. She had likely painted herself as the abandoned wife, a devoted woman who had made a small mistake, only to be cruelly discarded by a heartless husband. But she hadn't told them the real story. Sit, Susan snapped, gesturing to the couch. I sat, and she stood before me, her arms crossed, her eyes flashing with anger. I can't believe you, Matt, she said, her voice trembling. How could you just pack up and leave like that without even trying to work things out? I let her words hang in the air for a moment before leaning forward slightly, my elbows resting on my knees. What exactly did Emily tell you? I asked quietly. Susan scoffed. That you left. That you wouldn't talk to her. That she made a mistake, and instead of giving her a chance, you just walked out. I nodded. And did she tell you what that mistake was? There was silence. A long silence. Susan hesitated. She said it was something small. That she kissed someone. That it didn't mean anything. I exhaled slowly. Is that what she told you? More silence. This time, Richard spoke, his voice low but steady, with a hint of something else underneath. What really happened, Matt? I met his gaze directly. She slept with a guy from her office. 5 times. Lied to me about it. And when I found out, she told me it wasn't a big deal. Susan's face drained of color. That's not true. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the messages, and showed them to her. I let them read her own words. I watched as the blood drained from Susan's face, as her mouth opened and closed, wanting to defend her daughter but knowing she couldn't. Richard stood silently, his face impassive. After a long moment, Richard exhaled deeply. I should have known, he muttered. Susan turned to him, her eyes wide. Richard. He shook his head. No, he said, don't. You and I both know that Emily has never been one to take responsibility for anything in her life. He fixed his gaze on me, the weight of his look heavy. I'm sorry, Matt. I truly am. I nodded in response. I'm not here for an apology. I just didn't want you to believe a lie. Susan seemed as though she might break down in tears. I just don't understand. She was so angry when she told us. She really made it seem like you were the one overreacting. I gave a small smile, but there was no humor in it. Of course, she did. Emily wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She was simply angry because she had finally lost control. I stood up. I should go. Richard nodded, but Susan still looked unsettled, like she was struggling to come to terms with everything. I hadn't expected them to sever ties with their daughter. After all, she was their child. But at least now, they knew the truth, and that was enough. I walked to the door, stepped outside, and then stopped. Because there, parked at the curb, was Emily, leaning against her car with her arms crossed, her eyes locked onto mine the moment I stepped out. Her expression was unreadable, but the tension in her posture spoke volumes. Emily wasn't here to apologize. She was here to win. I closed the door behind me and slowly made my way toward her. She remained frozen, watching, waiting, probably expecting me to snap, to shout, or to break down. I didn't. I stopped a few feet away and tilted my head slightly. Are you waiting for something? Her jaw tightened. What did you tell them? I smirked. The truth. Her nostrils flared. You had no right to do that. I let out a short, amused laugh. No right? You're one to talk. I motioned toward the house behind us. You were the one who dragged them into this. You ran to them, hoping they'd back you up. You didn't expect them to hear both sides. A brief flicker of panic crossed her face before it vanished, quickly hidden beneath her anger. You just couldn't help yourself, could you? I continued. You had to make me the villain. I shook my head slowly. I didn't have to do anything. You did that all on your own. She took a step closer, her voice dropping lower. You don't get to do this, Matt. You don't get to act like you're some innocent victim. I raised an eyebrow. Did I cheat on you 5 times? Her lips pressed together in a thin line. That's what I thought, I said. She exhaled sharply, pacing in a tight circle before turning back to me. This isn't you. I frowned. Excuse me. This, she snapped, gesturing toward me. This whole cold, petty, vindictive act. This isn't who you are. I stared at her for a long moment before a small smile tugged at my lips. That's the problem, isn't it? I said quietly. You thought I'd always be the same. Emily's face shifted slightly. You thought I'd yell, get angry, leave, but then come back. I took a step toward her, closing the distance. You thought you could lie to my face, cheat on me, humiliate me, and I'd just forgive you. She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't finished. You never thought there'd be a day where I'd look at you and feel nothing. The color drained from her face. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of my words sink in. And then, finally, I exhaled. But here we are. She swallowed hard. Matt. No. I shook my head firmly. This conversation? It's over. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. You can't just walk away from this. I laughed. Actually laughed. Emily, I already did. I turned and walked to my car, opening the door. But just as I was about to get in, she spoke again. You'll regret this. I paused and glanced over my shoulder at her. Emily's face was tight with fury, her arms crossed again. But there was something different in her eyes, something glassy, like she had just realized that this was really happening. She had finally understood that her game had come to an end. I studied her for a long moment before smiling. No, I said simply. I won't. With that, I slid into my car, closed the door, and drove away. For the first time in years, I was free.